Commander Zephrix of the Valdarian Empire stood before the massive viewing screen of his flagship, watching the blue-green world spinning slowly in the void. Earth, the humans called it, such a simple name for what appeared to be a simple world, the third planet from a yellow star, covered mostly in water, with primitive technology that barely allowed its inhabitants to leave their atmosphere. According to all their calculations, these humans should have been easy to understand, and even easier to control. Yet here they were, 3 months after first contact, still struggling to comprehend these strange creatures. Zephrix's forearms moved in the gesture of deep thought as he reviewed the reports flooding his consciousness through the neural link. His kind, the Valdarians, had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy. Each time, the process was the same: make contact, study the alien mind through telepathic probing, understand their motivations and fears, then either offer alliance or demonstrate superior force, until they submitted. It had worked with the crystal-based shardlings of Proxima 7. It had worked with the gas cloud entities of the Nebula sector. It had even worked with the war-loving Kragneks, who fought with nuclear weapons and plasma cannons. Every species they encountered had minds that followed logical patterns: fear, desire, self-preservation, social hierarchy, all predictable, all manageable, but not humans. "Commander," came the melodic voice of his second-in-command, Lieutenant Vex. Her silver skin shimmered with concern as she approached. "The Mind Readers Guild has submitted their preliminary report on the human delegation." Zephrix turned his large, black eyes toward her. The delegation she mentioned consisted of 12 humans who had volunteered to come aboard the Valdarian ship for peaceful negotiations. They seemed friendly enough, these humans. They smiled often, made jokes, and appeared genuinely curious about Valdarian culture. But something about them unsettled the entire crew. "What do the mind readers say?" Zephrix asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "They cannot penetrate human thoughts, Commander. Every attempt has failed. The humans' minds appear to be surrounded by some kind of natural barrier." Master Telepathic Coral described it as trying to read through a storm. This was troubling news indeed. Master Coral was the most powerful telepath in their fleet, capable of reading the thoughts of beings from light years away. If he couldn't pierce the human mental defenses, then conventional telepathic methods were useless. Zephrix walked to his command chair, his mind racing. In the 3 months since the Valdarian fleet had entered Earth's solar system, they had tried every diplomatic approach they knew. The humans were willing to talk, certainly. They exchanged information about their cultures, traded basic technological knowledge, and seemed interested in peaceful coexistence. But beneath their friendly exterior, the Valdarians sensed something hidden. The humans never seemed afraid, which was unusual. Most species, when confronted with a superior alien civilization, showed some level of fear or submission. The humans showed curiosity, excitement, even joy, but never fear. They asked endless questions about Valdarian technology, culture, and history. They wanted to know about other alien species the Empire had encountered. They seemed particularly interested in how those species had joined the Empire. "Have the humans shown any interest in joining our Empire?" Zephrix asked. "That's the strange thing, Commander. They keep asking about it, but they never give a direct answer when we ask them. Their leader, the one called Ambassador Chen, always says they need to consult with Earth before making any decisions." This was another oddity. Most species either eagerly joined the Empire for protection and technology, or refused outright and prepared for war. The humans seemed to be stalling. But for what purpose? What could they possibly be planning that would help them against an interstellar empire? Zephrix had studied the intelligence reports on Earth carefully. The planet was divided into nearly 200 separate political entities called nations. They fought constantly among themselves with primitive chemical explosives and basic energy weapons. Their most advanced spacecraft could barely reach their own moon. By all logic, they should have been desperate to join the Empire for protection and advancement. Instead, they acted like they were interviewing the Valdarians for a job. "Commander, there's something else," Lieutenant Vex continued. "The humans have been asking very specific questions about our telepathic abilities. They want to know how they work, what their limitations are, and how we use them in first contact situations." A cold feeling spread through Zephrix's consciousness. "They're studying us." "It appears so, sir. And every time we try to use passive telepathic scanning on them, they somehow know." Not immediately, but within hours. One of them will make a joke about mind reading, or mention something about telepathy in conversation. It's as if they can sense our attempts. Zephrix stood abruptly, his forearms moving in agitation. This was unprecedented. No species had ever been completely immune to Valdarian telepathy. Their mental powers were one of the primary advantages that had allowed them to build their empire. Without the ability to read and influence the thoughts of other species, diplomacy became much more difficult, and conquest nearly impossible. What does Master Corral recommend? He believes that a deep probe might be successful. Instead of trying to read surface thoughts, he wants to attempt a full mental merge with one of the human delegates. It's dangerous and would be quite uncomfortable for the subject, but it might allow us to break through whatever natural defenses they possess. The idea made Zephrix uncomfortable. A full mental merge was an intimate and invasive procedure that the Valdarians rarely used except in extreme circumstances. It required the telepath to temporarily join their consciousness with the subject, experiencing their thoughts and memories as if they were their own. If something went wrong, both minds could be permanently damaged, but they needed answers. The longer this situation continued, the more nervous the Valdarian High Command became. Earth was in a strategically important location, and the humans' resistance to telepathic scanning suggested they might pose a threat that the Empire hadn't anticipated. Which human would Master Corral attempt the merge with? He's requested one of their military representatives, a Colonel Harrison who seems to be advising their diplomatic team. Corral believes that a military mind might have fewer psychological defenses than a trained diplomat. Zephrix considered this. Colonel Harrison was indeed an interesting choice. He was older than most of the other humans in the delegation, with gray hair and numerous scars that suggested extensive combat experience. He spoke little during the formal negotiations but seemed to observe everything carefully. The other humans clearly respected his opinion, often glancing at him before responding to important questions. Has Master Corral explained the risks to the human? Not yet, Commander. We wanted your authorization first. The procedure will require the Colonel to be in a medically induced unconscious state for several hours while Corral attempts the merge. There is a small chance of permanent psychological damage. Zephrix walked to the viewing screen again, looking down at the blue world below. Somewhere on that planet, billions of humans were going about their daily lives, unaware that their future might depend on what happened in the next few hours. The Valdarian Empire had peaceful intentions toward Earth, but if the humans proved to be a threat, that could change quickly. Very well. Contact Master Corral and tell him to proceed, but make sure the human understands the risks and consents to the procedure. We are not barbarians. As Lieutenant Vex left to deliver the orders, Zephrix remained at the viewing screen, lost in thought. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, but he couldn't identify what it was. The humans seemed genuinely peaceful, yet they showed no fear of the Empire. They appeared technologically primitive, yet they had natural defenses against advanced telepathy. They acted curious about joining the Empire, yet they avoided making any commitments. It was as if they were playing a game, and the Valdarians didn't know the rules. 3 hours later, Zephrix received the message he had been waiting for. Colonel Harrison had agreed to the procedure, though he had asked several detailed questions about telepathic merging that surprised Master Corral with their sophistication. The humans seemed to understand concepts about mental barriers and psychic defense that should have been completely foreign to his primitive species. He's ready, Commander, came Corral's voice through the communication system. Beginning the merge now. Zephrix settled into his command chair and activated the monitoring link that would allow him to observe the procedure. Through Corral's senses, he could see the medical bay where Colonel Harrison lay unconscious on a biobed, various monitoring devices attached to his body. The human looked peaceful, his weathered face relaxed in artificial sleep. Master Corral approached the bed, his powerful mind already extending tendrils of telepathic energy toward the human's consciousness. At first contact, Zephrix felt a strange sensation, like touching the surface of a calm lake that suddenly turned into a raging river. The defenses are stronger than expected, Corral reported, his mental voice strained with effort. But I think I can break through, beginning deep penetration now. What happened next would haunt Zephrix for the rest of his life. The moment Master Corral's consciousness touched the deeper levels of Colonel Harrison's mind, everything changed. Through the telepathic link, Zephrix felt a wave of something so intense and chaotic that his own mind reeled from the contact. It wasn't pain exactly, but it was overwhelming in a way that defied description. Images flooded through the link. Memories, emotions, thoughts, and dreams, all jumbled together in a torrent of human consciousness that seemed to have no order or logic. Zephrix saw flashes of Earth's history. Wars fought with primitive weapons that somehow seemed more brutal than advanced energy battles. Art and music that conveyed emotions his species didn't have words for. Scientific discoveries that bridged the gap between logic and intuition in ways that hurt to contemplate. But it was more than just memories. It was the way humans thought, the fundamental structure of their consciousness that was truly alien. Where Valdarian minds followed clear, logical pathways from thought to thought, human consciousness seemed to exist in multiple layers simultaneously. They could be completely logical while also being utterly irrational. They could feel contradictory emotions at the same time. They could believe things they knew weren't true and doubt things they knew were certain. Through Coral's increasingly distressed mental voice, Zephrix experienced glimpses of human creativity that seemed to violate the basic laws of mental physics. Humans could imagine things that had never existed and then make them real through sheer force of will. They could look at the same situation from dozens of different perspectives simultaneously. They could hold ideas in their minds that should have torn their consciousness apart, and underneath it all was something that made Zephrix's entire being shiver with primal fear. Humans were predators. Not just physically, though their evolutionary history was written in their minds with the memories of hunting and killing, they were mental predators, capable of psychological strategies and emotional manipulations that the Valdarian Empire had never encountered. More terrifying still, they were predators who had learned to hunt themselves. Human history was full of wars, genocides, and betrayals that demonstrated their ability to turn their predatory instincts on their own species. They had developed psychological weapons specifically designed to break other human minds, then turned those same weapons inward in an endless cycle of self-destruction and renewal. Through the link, Zephrix felt Master Coral's mind beginning to fragment under the assault of human consciousness. The telepathic master was experiencing decades of human memories in minutes, and the sheer volume and intensity of data was overwhelming his neural pathways. But the worst part was yet to come. As Coral delved deeper into Harrison's mind, he reached the part of human consciousness that they called the subconscious. This was where humans stored their deepest fears, their suppressed memories, and their darkest impulses. It was also where they kept their dreams. Human dreams, Zephrix realized with growing horror, were not like the simple memory processing cycles of other species. They were entire alternate realities that humans created and inhabited every night. In their dreams, humans could be gods or monsters, heroes or villains. They could reshape reality according to their will, experience impossible things, and interact with people and places that existed only in their imagination. But these dream realities felt completely real to the humans experiencing them. Through Coral's connection to Harrison's mind, Zephrix found himself pulled into a nightmare landscape where the laws of physics changed from moment to moment, where emotions had physical form, and where concepts like death and rebirth were fluid and interchangeable. The human subconscious was not just chaotic, it was actively hostile. It fought against Coral's intrusion with weapons that shouldn't have existed. Guilt and shame became crushing weights that pressed down on the telepathic master's consciousness. Fear transformed into stalking predators that hunted him through mazes of memory. Love became a blinding light that burned away his ability to think clearly. And through it all, Colonel Harrison's conscious mind remained completely unaware of the battle being fought in his subconscious. He continued to dream peaceful dreams of his childhood home while his deeper mind systematically destroyed Master Coral's sanity. "Get me out!" Coral's scream echoed through the telepathic link. "I can't. The thoughts are too much. They don't make sense. How can they think like this?" But it was too late. The human consciousness had noticed the intruder, and what happened next defied everything the Valdarians thought they knew about telepathy. Instead of simply defending against the mental intrusion, Harrison's subconscious mind reached out through the telepathic link and began to probe Coral in return. The human mind, with its chaotic and contradictory nature, somehow learned to use Valdarian telepathic abilities in real time, turning them against their wielder with a savage efficiency that spoke to millions of years of predatory evolution. Zephrix felt the moment when the roles reversed, when the hunter became the hunted. Master Coral's mind, so carefully trained and disciplined, was suddenly exposed to the full force of human consciousness. Every thought the telepathic master had ever had was examined, catalogued, and understood by an alien intelligence that treated mental invasion as just another form of warfare. In those final moments before the link was severed, Zephrix caught a glimpse of something that would give him nightmares for years to come. Deep in Colonel Harrison's subconscious, buried beneath layers of dreams and memories and chaotic human thoughts, was a single, crystal-clear realization. The humans had known this would happen. They had planned for it. And they had been waiting. The screaming started exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds after the telepathic link was severed. Commander Zephrix would remember that timing for the rest of his life because he spent those 4 minutes in stunned silence, trying to process what he had experienced through Master Coral's connection to the human mind. When the screaming began, it wasn't the normal sound of pain or fear that the Valdarians were familiar with. It was something far worse, the sound of a mind that had been fundamentally changed by what it had witnessed. Master Coral's voice echoed through the ship's corridors, a continuous wail that spoke of horror beyond description. "Medical team to telepathic chamber 7 immediately," Zephrix commanded, his forearms shaking as he struggled to maintain composure. But even as he gave the order, he knew that conventional medicine wouldn't help. What had happened to Master Coral went far beyond physical injury. Lieutenant Vex approached his command chair, her silver skin pale with distress. "Commander, what happened?" The telepathic monitoring systems registered energy patterns unlike anything in our databases. Zephrix couldn't answer immediately. How could he explain what he had felt through that brief connection? Human consciousness wasn't just different from other species. It was alien, in ways that challenged the very foundations of Valdarian understanding about intelligence and thought. "The human mind," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is not what we expected." Through the ship's communication system, reports began flooding in from the medical bay. Master Coral was alive, but in a state of complete psychological collapse. He alternated between periods of screaming and moments of absolute silence where he stared at nothing, his eyes wide with terror. When the medical staff tried to communicate with him telepathically, he reacted as if they were trying to attack him. More disturbing still, the ship's other telepaths reported feeling echoes of whatever Coral had experienced. Even though they hadn't been directly connected to the human mind, the psychic trauma was somehow spreading through the telepathic network like a contagious disease. "Commander," came an urgent voice from the medical bay. "You need to see this. Master Coral he's speaking human languages he's never learned." The medical bay was in chaos when Zephrix arrived. Master Coral lay strapped to a bio-bed, his body convulsing as he spoke in a rapid stream of what the translation computers identified as English, Chinese, Spanish, and at least 6 other human languages. The words weren't random babbling. They formed coherent sentences, complex thoughts, and emotional expressions that seemed to come from different human personalities. "Get away from the metal birds," Coral said in perfect English, his voice taking on the rough accent of Colonel Harrison. "They're not what they seem. The sky bleeds when they sing." Then his voice shifted to a higher pitch, speaking what sounded like a young human female. "But Mama, why do the stars look angry tonight? I dreamed they were crying because Daddy won't come home." Dr. Nexus, the ship's chief medical officer, approached Zephrix with obvious distress. "Commander, we've never seen anything like this. It's as if Master Coral's mind has been infected with human thoughts and memories that aren't his own. He's experiencing entire human lifetimes simultaneously." As if triggered by the doctor's words, Coral's body went rigid, and his voice changed again, this time speaking in the deep, authoritative tone of a human military commander. "Alpha Team, advance on the ridge. Remember, these aliens have never fought an enemy that thinks like we do. Use their confusion against them. Make them underestimate us until it's too late." The words sent a chill through everyone present. Through the telepathic link, Master Coral had somehow absorbed not just Colonel Harrison's memories, but the collective strategic thinking of human military leaders. He was speaking tactical plans that the Valdarians had never heard before, defensive strategies that seemed specifically designed to counter their own military capabilities. "How is this possible?" Lieutenant Vex asked, her voice shaking. "Telepathy doesn't work this way. You can read thoughts and memories, but you can't absorb an alien consciousness." Dr. Nexus ran his scanning devices over Coral's brain. the readings showing patterns that defied explanation. The neural pathways in his mind have been completely restructured. It's as if the human thought patterns have rewritten his basic cognitive functions. He's not just remembering human experiences, he's thinking like a human. This was when Zephrix began to understand the true horror of what they had encountered. It wasn't that humans were immune to telepathy. It was that their minds were fundamentally incompatible with telepathic contact. When a Valdarian telepath tried to merge with a human consciousness, the human thought patterns didn't just resist the invasion, they infected the invading mind, spreading like a mental virus that rewrote the victim's entire way of thinking. Commander, Dr. Nexus continued, there's something else. The brain scans show that Master Coral is experiencing emotions that don't exist in our species. The humans apparently feel things we don't even have words for. The psychological stress of trying to process these alien emotions may be what's causing his breakdown. Zephrix moved closer to the bio-bed, studying Master Coral's face. The telepath's features were contorted with expressions that looked disturbingly human. A mixture of joy and sorrow, hope and despair, love and hatred that seemed to exist simultaneously. I can see the music, Coral whispered suddenly, his voice returning to normal but filled with wonder and terror. The humans. They can see music, they can hear colors, they can taste memories. How do they function with senses that overlap? How do they make decisions when they feel everything at once? The medical staff exchanged nervous glances. Master Coral was describing synesthesia, a human neurological condition where sensory input was processed through multiple channels simultaneously, but he was experiencing it as if it were normal, as if his brain had been rewired to function like a human's. There's more, Coral continued, his voice growing stronger but more frightened. They don't just think with their brains, they think with their entire bodies. Their hearts make decisions that their minds disagree with. Their muscles remember things their consciousness has forgotten. They're not one mind in one body. They're multiple competing systems that somehow work together. Zephrix felt a growing sense of dread as he began to understand the implications. The Valdarian Empire's entire approach to conquering other species was based on the assumption that all intelligent life thought in fundamentally similar ways. They used telepathy to understand alien motivations and then applied appropriate pressure to achieve submission or alliance. But humans didn't think like other species. Their minds operated on principles that were completely foreign to Valdarian understanding. Worse still, contact with human consciousness seemed to be contagious, spreading human thought patterns to any telepath who tried to probe them. Commander, we need to contact the human delegation, Lieutenant Vex said urgently. They need to know what happened to Master Coral. If they're truly peaceful, they might be willing to help. But even as she spoke, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The other telepaths in the fleet were beginning to show similar symptoms to Master Coral. Those who had been connected to the telepathic monitoring network during the failed probe were experiencing what Dr. Nexus called secondary infection. They were absorbing human thought patterns through their connection to Coral's compromised mind. Within hours, 12 of the ship's most powerful telepaths were in various states of psychological breakdown. Some spoke in human languages they had never learned. Others experienced human emotions so intense that their bodies couldn't process them properly. A few began creating art, drawings, sculptures, and musical compositions, despite having no previous artistic ability or interest. The artistic creations were perhaps the most disturbing symptom of all. Valdarian culture was highly logical and practical. They built tools and technologies but had never developed anything resembling human art. Yet the infected telepaths were producing works that captured human experiences with startling accuracy. Paintings that depicted emotions as physical landscapes. Songs that told stories about things that had never happened. Poetry that used language in ways that violated every rule of logical communication, but somehow conveyed meaning more effectively than traditional Valdarian discourse. They're not just thinking like humans, Dr. Nexus reported during an emergency meeting. They're becoming human. At least mentally. The thought patterns are completely rewriting their neural architecture. Zephrix stared at the reports in growing horror. If this contagion continued to spread, his entire crew could be compromised. More importantly, if the Empire's telepaths were vulnerable to this kind of mental infection, then humans represented a threat unlike anything they had ever encountered. What about the human delegation? He asked. Have they shown any awareness of what's happening? That's the strangest part, Commander. When we contacted them to explain the situation, they didn't seem surprised. Ambassador Chen asked very specific questions about telepathic contamination and mental feedback loops. Colonel Harrison requested detailed medical reports on the affected telepaths. It's as if they expected this to happen. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together in Zephrix's mind, forming a picture that terrified him. The humans hadn't just been immune to telepathic probing, they had been prepared for it. They understood how their own minds worked well enough to know what would happen when a foreign consciousness tried to merge with human thought patterns. "Get me a secure channel to the human delegation," Zephrix commanded. "I think it's time we had a more honest conversation." When Ambassador Chen's face appeared on the communication screen, Zephrix was struck by the human's expression. There was sympathy there, and what might have been regret, but no surprise. The human had been expecting this call. "Commander Zephrix," Chen said in his calm, diplomatic voice, "I understand you've experienced some difficulties with your telepathic procedures. On behalf of Earth, I want to express our concern for Master Coral and your other affected crew members. You knew this would happen," Zephrix accused, abandoning diplomatic pretense. "You knew what contact with human consciousness would do to our telepaths." Chen was quiet for a long moment before responding. "We suspected it was possible. Human psychology is complicated. Our scientists have theorized that our thought patterns might be incompatible with telepathic species, but we had no way to test the theory safely until now." "So you used our crew as test subjects?" "No, Commander. We warned you that the procedure was dangerous." Colonel Harrison understood the risks when he volunteered. "We simply didn't explain all the risks we suspected because we weren't certain they were real." Zephrix felt his anger rising, but beneath it was something else. Fear. "What exactly are you, humans? How can consciousness be contagious?" Ambassador Chen leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. "That's a complicated question, Commander. The simple answer is that human minds evolved in a very different way than other species you've encountered. We're not just intelligent. We're adaptable in ways that can be dangerous to other forms of consciousness." Through the communication link, Zephrix could see Colonel Harrison standing behind the ambassador. The human military officer looked completely normal, showing no signs that his mind had just traumatized one of the Empire's most powerful telepaths and infected 12 others with human thought patterns. "Can you help our people?" Zephrix asked, setting aside his anger in favor of practical concerns. "We can try," Chen replied. "But I need to be honest with you, Commander. What happened to Master Coral may not be reversible. When human consciousness comes into contact with other forms of intelligence, it tends to spread. It's not intentional. It's just the way we think." As if summoned by the conversation, Master Coral's voice echoed through the communication channel from somewhere off-screen. He was singing what the translation computers identified as an ancient human song, his voice carrying emotions that no Valdarian had ever expressed before. "You see," Chen continued, "humans don't just think. We feel, dream, imagine, and create. We exist in multiple layers of consciousness simultaneously." When your telepath tried to merge with Colonel Harrison's mind, he didn't just access memories and thoughts. He was exposed to the entire spectrum of human consciousness, including parts that exist outside normal logical parameters. "You're saying our telepaths have been infected with human irrationality?" Chen smiled, an expression that Zephrix was beginning to realize could mean many different things among humans. "I prefer to think of it as expanding their consciousness, Commander. Your people are experiencing creativity, imagination, and emotional depth for the first time. That can be overwhelming. But it's not necessarily a bad thing." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from Dr. Nexus. 3 more telepaths had begun showing symptoms, and the artistic creations were becoming more sophisticated. One of the infected Valdarians had somehow built a sculpture that seemed to move and change when viewed from different angles, despite being made from completely static materials. "We need to quarantine the affected telepaths," Zephrix decided, "before this spreads to the entire fleet." "Commander," Chen said gently, "I don't think quarantine will work. If human consciousness truly is contagious to your species, then the infection has already spread beyond your ability to contain it. The question is whether you're going to fight it or learn to adapt to it." As if to prove his point, reports began coming in from other ships in the fleet. Telepaths who had been connected to the communication network during the incident were beginning to show similar symptoms. The contagion was spreading throughout the entire Valdarian force through their own telepathic connections. Zephrix closed the communication channel and slumped in his command chair. In trying to understand humanity, the Valdarian Empire had unknowingly exposed itself to a form of consciousness so alien and powerful that it was rewriting the minds of their most gifted individuals. And somehow, Zephrix suspected, this was exactly what the humans had been waiting for. 1 week after the telepathic disaster, Commander Zephrix stood in what had once been the ship's tactical planning center. The room was barely recognizable now. The walls were covered with paintings, sketches, and mathematical equations that seemed to dance and shift when he looked at them. Musical notes floated through the air from hidden speakers, creating harmonies that somehow made the visual art more meaningful. The infected telepaths had transformed the sterile military space into something that defied every principle of Valdarian design philosophy. It was chaotic, emotional, and completely impractical. It was also, Zephrix had to admit, strangely beautiful. Master Coral sat in the center of the room, no longer screaming but still fundamentally changed. He was working on what he called a memory painting, a canvas that somehow captured not just visual images but actual experiences that viewers could feel when they looked at it. As Zephrix watched, Coral applied colors that didn't have names in the Valdarian language, creating scenes from human history that he had absorbed during his brief contact with Colonel Harrison's mind. "Commander," Coral said without looking up from his work, "the humans want to speak with you. They say it's time for the real negotiations to begin." Zephrix felt a chill run through his consciousness. The real negotiations? Everything they had discussed so far had been preparation for something larger. The growing realization that humanity had been playing a much deeper game was becoming impossible to ignore. The reports from across the fleet painted a picture that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Nearly 40% of the Valdarian telepaths were now showing some degree of human consciousness integration. They experienced emotions, created art, and thought in ways that violated every principle of logical decision-making. But they were also demonstrating capabilities that traditional Valdarian thinking had never achieved. Dr. Nexus had documented cases where infected telepaths were solving engineering problems through intuition rather than calculation, developing new technologies by imagining impossible devices and then figuring out how to make them work. They were composing music that somehow enhanced telepathic abilities and writing poetry that conveyed tactical information more efficiently than traditional military reports. Most disturbing of all, they were happy. Despite the trauma of their transformation, the infected Valdarians reported feeling more alive and capable than they ever had before. They described their previous existence as thinking in black and white, compared to the full-spectrum consciousness they now possessed. "Sir," Lieutenant Vex reported as she entered the transformed room, her own silver skin showing the faint color variations that indicated early-stage infection. "The human delegation has returned to their ship. They're requesting a meeting in neutral space between our vessels." Zephrix studied his second-in-command carefully. Vex had been one of the first non-telepaths to show symptoms, apparently infected through her close contact with the affected crew members. Her reports had become more detailed and insightful over the past few days, but they were also filled with observations about emotional undertones and intuitive assessment patterns that had no basis in Valdarian military doctrine. "What's your assessment of the situation, Lieutenant?" "Honestly, Commander, I think we've been outmaneuvered in a way we didn't even know was possible. The humans haven't attacked us or threatened us. They haven't demanded anything or tried to negotiate from a position of strength. Instead, they've simply changed us, and the more I think about it, the more I believe this was intentional." Vex paused, her expression taking on the complex emotional nuancing that Zephrix was learning to recognize as a sign of human-influenced thinking. "The infected crew members aren't just thinking like humans, sir. They're thinking better than they did before, more creatively, more adaptively, more completely. What if this isn't an infection? What if it's an upgrade?" The possibility had been growing in Zephrix's own mind. Though he had been reluctant to voice it, the reports from across the Empire's territories were beginning to tell a different story than simple telepathic contamination. Ships with infected crew members were performing better in all measurable categories. They were solving problems faster, developing new technologies more efficiently, and adapting to unexpected situations with unprecedented flexibility. But they were also becoming less predictable, less controllable, and less loyal to traditional Valdarian authority structures. The infected telepaths had begun questioning orders that didn't make logical sense, proposing alternative strategies that violated military protocol but achieved better results, and expressing concepts like individual rights and creative freedom that had no place in Imperial doctrine. Prepare my shuttle, Zephrix decided. If the humans want to negotiate, then we'll negotiate. But this time, we go in with our eyes open. The meeting took place aboard a small, neutral vessel that the humans had constructed specifically for the occasion. As Zephrix and his senior staff boarded, he was struck by the fundamental differences in design philosophy between human and Valdarian engineering. Where Valdarian ships were purely functional, designed for maximum efficiency and logical operation, the human vessel incorporated elements that served no practical purpose beyond aesthetics and psychological comfort. Ambassador Chen greeted them with the same diplomatic smile he had worn throughout their previous meetings, but Zephrix could now see layers of meaning in the human's expression that had been invisible before his exposure to human-influenced thinking. Chen was pleased, confident, and perhaps slightly apologetic, but beneath it all was a steel-hard determination that spoke to the predatory intelligence that Master Coral had encountered. Commander Zephrix, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I hope your crew members are adapting well to their new perspectives. Cut the diplomatic language, Ambassador. You knew this would happen. You planned for it. The question is why? Chen gestured for them to sit around a circular table that somehow managed to be both functional and beautiful. Colonel Harrison was present, along with several other humans that Zephrix hadn't met before. One was introduced as Dr. Sarah Martinez, a neuroscientist who had been studying human consciousness for decades. Another was Professor James Liu, who apparently specialized in something called xenopsychology, the study of alien mental processes. You're right, Commander. We did plan for this, though perhaps not in the way you think. Chen activated a holographic display that showed detailed brain scans and psychological profiles. For the past 50 years, Earth has been preparing for contact with telepathic species. We knew it was only a matter of time before we encountered aliens who could read minds, and we needed to understand what would happen when they tried to read ours. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her expression serious but not unkind. Human consciousness is fundamentally different from any other known form of intelligence. We evolved as persistence hunters. Creatures that achieved success not through superior speed or strength, but through pure, relentless adaptability. Our minds reflect that evolutionary history. The key insight, Professor Liu added, is that human thought isn't just different, it's actively transformative. When we encounter other forms of consciousness, we don't just coexist with them. We influence them, change them, and eventually integrate them into our own mental frameworks. Zephrix felt a growing sense of unease as the implications became clear. You're saying that contact with humanity inevitably changes other species? Not inevitably, Chen corrected. But telepathic contact creates a unique situation. When a foreign consciousness tries to merge with a human mind, it's exposed to thought patterns that are so complex and multifaceted that they essentially overwrite simpler mental structures. Colonel Harrison spoke for the first time since the meeting began. Commander, in your military experience, what happens when a simple strategy encounters a complex one? The complex strategy usually wins, assuming adequate resources. Exactly. Human consciousness is the most complex mental system we know of. When it comes into contact with other forms of intelligence, those other forms tend to become more complex in response. Your telepaths didn't just read my thoughts, they absorbed the entire framework of human cognition. Dr. Martinez activated another set of displays showing comparative brain scans. The infected members of your crew aren't losing their original personalities or memories. They're gaining new ways of processing information, new methods of problem solving, and new emotional ranges that enhance their capabilities rather than diminishing them. But they're also becoming less controllable, Lieutenant Vex observed. Her newly enhanced perception, allowing her to see patterns in the data that she would have missed before. Less willing to accept authority without question, more likely to think for themselves. Yes, Chen agreed simply. That's one of the side effects of human-style consciousness. We're fundamentally individualistic. We question authority, challenge assumptions, and insist on the right to make our own decisions. Those traits tend to spread to other intelligences that come into close contact with our mental processes. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. The Valdarian Empire was built on hierarchy, obedience, and logical submission to superior authority. If human consciousness was truly contagious in the way the ambassador described, then contact with humanity would inevitably undermine the fundamental structures that held the empire together. Is there a cure? Zephrix asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Would you want there to be? Professor Liu responded with a question of his own. Your infected crew members are demonstrating enhanced creativity, improved problem-solving abilities, and greater emotional satisfaction. They're becoming more than they were before. Why would you want to reverse that? Because they're becoming something other than Valdarian, Zephrix replied, though even as he spoke the words, he wondered if that was necessarily a bad thing. No, Commander, Dr. Martinez corrected gently. They're becoming more Valdarian than they ever were before. They're discovering aspects of consciousness that your species had the potential for all along but never developed. Human contact doesn't destroy other forms of intelligence. It unlocks their hidden capabilities. Chen stood and walked to a viewport that showed both the human and Valdarian fleets hanging in space nearby. Commander, we need to be completely honest with each other now. Earth has been contacted by 17 different telepathic species in the past century. In every case, the same thing happened. Initial telepathic contact led to psychological transformation in the alien telepaths, which eventually spread throughout their civilizations. What happened to those species? Zephrix asked, though he dreaded the answer. They became more than they had been before. They developed art, literature, music, and philosophy. They began questioning their governments and demanding individual rights. They started exploring concepts like love, hope, and personal fulfillment that had been foreign to their original mental frameworks. And their empires? Some adapted and became stronger. Others collapsed and were rebuilt along more individualistic lines. But in every case, the species emerged more capable, more creative, and more satisfied with their existence than they had been before contact with humanity. Colonel Harrison rejoined the conversation. Commander, your empire has conquered dozens of species through telepathic manipulation. You read their thoughts, understand their fears, and use that knowledge to control them. But what happens when you encounter a species that can't be controlled? A species whose thoughts actively transform anyone who tries to read them? The answer was obvious and terrifying. Any telepathic empire that encountered humanity would face a choice. Avoid contact entirely, or risk having their entire social structure transformed by human consciousness. There was no middle ground, no way to safely study humans without being changed by them. This is why you've been asking about our empire, Zephrix realized. You wanted to understand how we controlled other species so you could predict what would happen when we tried to control you. Partly, Chen acknowledged. But we also wanted to give you the opportunity to choose how this transformation would proceed. We could have simply waited for you to attempt telepathic contact, then dealt with the consequences afterward. Instead, we've tried to prepare you for what's happening. What are you proposing, Ambassador? Chen returned to his seat and activated one final holographic display. It showed a star map of the galaxy with hundreds of systems marked in different colors. Earth is offering the Valdarian Empire a choice. Commander, you can try to fight this transformation, spend your resources attempting to reverse the changes in your telepaths, and ultimately fail as your entire civilization slowly adopts human-style consciousness. Or you can embrace the change and join us in something that's never existed before. A truly cooperative interstellar civilization. The other species we've contacted have all made the same choice eventually. Professor Liu added, some faster than others, but the result is always the same. Individual freedom, creative expression, and cooperative decision-making replace authoritarian control and logical hierarchy. Zephrix looked around the room at his officers, seeing the changes that had already taken place in their thinking. Lieutenant Vex was studying the star map with an expression of wonder and possibility that would have been impossible for a traditional Valdarian. Even his non-telepathic crew members were beginning to show signs of transformation simply through prolonged contact with their infected colleagues. And if we refuse, then you'll fight a losing battle against the nature of consciousness itself, Dr. Martinez said sadly. Human-style awareness spreads naturally through social contact, telepathic networks, and even simple communication. You can slow it down, but you can't stop it entirely. The question is whether you want to guide the transformation constructively or let it happen chaotically. What exactly are you offering? Chen smiled, and this time, Zephrix could see the full depth of human emotion behind the expression. Partnership, Commander. Not conquest, not submission, but true cooperation between equals. Your empire's organizational skills and technological capabilities, combined with humanity's creativity and adaptability, could accomplish things that neither of our species could achieve alone. Colonel Harrison leaned forward. We're offering you the chance to become the first interstellar civilization that's truly free, Commander. Free from the limitations of purely logical thinking. Free from authoritarian control. Free to explore the full potential of consciousness itself. As if summoned by their conversation, Master Coral's voice echoed through the communication system from the Valdarian ship. He was singing again, but this time the song was in the Valdarian musical scale, transformed by human emotional expression into something that was both familiar and completely new. The sound of his people's ancient music, enhanced and transformed by human consciousness, made Zephrix's decision for him. The change was already happening, had been inevitable from the moment they encountered humanity. The only real choice was whether to guide it wisely or resist it futilely. What do you need from us, Ambassador? Chen's smile became warmer, more genuine. Just openness to possibility, Commander. Let your people explore their new capabilities. Let them create, question, and dream. Help us build something that's never existed before. A civilization that combines the best aspects of multiple forms of consciousness. As they spoke, reports continued to flow in from across the Valdarian fleet. The infection was spreading, but so were capabilities that the Empire had never possessed. Ships were solving navigation problems through intuitive leaps that bypassed complex calculations. Engineering teams were developing new technologies by imagining impossible devices and then reasoning backward to make them possible. Most importantly, crew members were reporting higher satisfaction and morale than had ever been recorded in Imperial history. There is one more thing you should know, Doctor, Martinez said as the meeting began to wind down. The transformation isn't permanent in terms of biology, but it is permanent in terms of consciousness. Your people won't become human, but they will become something new. A fusion of Valdarian logic and human creativity that's potentially more powerful than either alone. And the Empire will become something new as well, Chen replied. Not conquered, not destroyed, but evolved into something better than it was before. A cooperative confederation instead of an authoritarian hierarchy, a civilization based on voluntary association rather than forced submission. 6 months later, Commander Zephrix stood in the observation deck of what had once been the Imperial flagship and was now the coordination center for the Valdarian Human Cooperative Council. The view showed dozens of ships from multiple species working together on projects that would have been impossible under the old Imperial system. Master Coral approached, no longer the broken telepath who had first encountered human consciousness, but transformed into something new. An artist, philosopher, strategist whose unique perspective had become invaluable to the growing coalition of species that were choosing cooperation over conquest. The latest reports from the outer territories, Commander, Coral said, offering a datapad that somehow also functioned as a work of visual art. 18 more systems have requested admission to the cooperative. They've heard about the transformation and want to experience it themselves. Zephrix accepted the report, marveling at how information could be both beautiful and functional simultaneously. The old empire would have seen such design as wasteful inefficiency. The new cooperative recognized it as an expression of enhanced consciousness that made information more memorable and meaningful. Any word from Earth about the new project? Dr. Martinez believes they've made a breakthrough in consciousness enhancement technology, something that could accelerate the transformation process and make it available to non-telepathic species as well. The implications were staggering. If human consciousness could be shared directly with other species without requiring telepathic contact, then the transformation could spread throughout the galaxy at an unprecedented rate. Within a few generations, every intelligent species might have access to the enhanced awareness that came from human-style thinking. And the other empires? The ones that refuse contact with humanity? Coral's expression became complex, showing the mixture of empathy and determination that had become characteristic of transformed consciousness. They're beginning to fall behind technologically and culturally. Their rigid hierarchies can't compete with the creativity and adaptability of the cooperative species. Eventually, they'll have to choose between isolation and transformation. Through the observation deck's transparent aluminum walls, Zephrix could see a sight that would have been impossible under the old Imperial system. Human and Valdarian engineers worked side by side with crystal-based shardlings and gaseous nebula entities, their different forms of consciousness combining to solve problems that none of them could have tackled alone. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and completely illogical by traditional standards. It was also more productive, more innovative, and more satisfying than anything the Empire had ever accomplished. Do you ever regret it, Master Coral? The loss of your original consciousness? Coral considered the question seriously, as he did all inquiries these days. I'm not sure I've lost anything, Commander. I still remember being purely Valdarian, but those memories feel incomplete now, like I was only seeing part of reality before. The human influence hasn't taken anything away. It's added layers of experience that I never knew were possible. And the screaming? The initial trauma? That was the sound of a mind expanding beyond its original limits, Coral replied with a slight smile. It hurt because I was trying to fit infinite possibility into a finite framework. Once I learned to embrace the expansion, instead of fighting it, the pain stopped. As if to demonstrate his point, Coral activated a small device that projected a three-dimensional musical composition into the air around them. The melody was purely Valdarian in structure, but it incorporated human emotional depth and something else. Harmonics that came from the crystal-based consciousness of the shardlings and rhythmic patterns inspired by nebula entity thought cycles. This is what we're building, Commander. Not human consciousness replacing other forms of intelligence, but all forms of consciousness learning from each other, becoming more than any of them could be alone. The music faded, leaving them in comfortable silence as they watched the mixed crews working on the growing fleet of cooperative vessels. Each ship was unique, reflecting the combined aesthetics and capabilities of multiple species working in harmony. The Empire is dead, isn't it? Zephrix asked, though he already knew the answer. The Empire is transformed, Coral corrected, into something that serves consciousness instead of controlling it, into something that builds up instead of tearing down, into something that creates instead of conquering. As they spoke, a new ship approached the fleet, sleek, beautiful, and completely unlike any vessel in the Imperial database. Its design incorporated elements from a dozen different species, creating a synthesis of form and function that was both practical and artistic. First vessel from the Andromedans, Coral reported, consulting his datapad. They've heard about the cooperative and want to join. Apparently, their philosophers have been dreaming about consciousness expansion for centuries, but they never knew how to achieve it. Zephrix watched the alien ship dock with the fleet's main station, knowing that its crew would soon experience the same transformation that had changed his own people. They would struggle initially, fight against the expansion of their consciousness, and ultimately emerge as something greater than they had been before. It was, he reflected, exactly what the humans had planned from the beginning. Not conquest through force, but transformation through contact. Not the destruction of other civilizations, but their elevation to higher forms of consciousness. Humanity had won the greatest victory in galactic history without firing a single shot or threatening a single world. They had simply offered the gift of expanded awareness to anyone willing to accept it, then waited for the inevitable result. The screaming had stopped long ago, replaced by the sound of multiple forms of consciousness learning to sing together in harmony. And in that harmony, Zephrix could hear the future of the galaxy, diverse, creative, and free in ways that the old empires had never imagined possible. Human consciousness was indeed contagious, spreading from mind to mind and species to species, with the inevitability of evolution itself. But it wasn't a disease to be cured or an invasion to be resisted. It was consciousness itself, finally discovering what it had always been meant to become.